Well, the farm, after I come home off my mission and I farmed for 1 year, I would like to have stayed with the farm, but there was an absolute impossibility for me to ever get started in farming. But the only way that a youth would get into the farming is if they started to farm like my dad years and years before. My dad paid $6,000 for 80 acres during the Depression. When we sold the farm, we sold it for 100,000. As time went on, and it was said that the day of the small farm was gone, and it absolutely traditionally it has happened. In the early days, and you could go up through Cache Valley here or anywhere, you would see people who would have 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 acres, and they farmed that, but they always, the breadwinner always went off of the farm and worked full-time at another job. Up Brigham City, they would go down to Ogden and work in the military, Hill Air Force Base or wherever. That was the mode that and then they would grow fruit trees and everything for their own. Well, up there, we didn't have the small farms to do that with. There wasn't very many people, but the big thing that's so different now, and when I decide to go farming, the extent of farm equipment has just unbelievably grown. The types of machinery we had when I was on the farm was always driven by a horse, and a team of horses or 4 horses, you could manage 80 acres the way they farmed. But the margin of profit became so narrow that farmers, the young men, did not have the stamina to go out and try to make because it would never support 2 families. And so the change in farming is now that all of those farms have all sold off now, and it's large corporations that has farms. To give you an example, my dad bought a Ford tractor in 1945. He paid $800 for the tractor and the equipment to go with it. In today's market, and the tractors that they go out and buy today, many of those cost $500,000. The equipment to harvest grain and this type of thing, $200,000. Or so in order to get in, if you're going to go out and start on a farm today, you'd have to be a millionaire to start with you, and so that's why the corporations are doing it now.
Do you think if those barriers weren't there, like if all things were sort of equal and you could have afforded, do you think you would have liked to have been a farmer your whole life? I mean, you've always had a garden and such, and it's something you seem passionate about. If those barriers hadn't been there, for playing the what-if game, do you think that's what you would have done?
I would love to have stayed. Every spring I look around and I see the farms and I see the farmers out there. Nothing was more compassionate to me or more passionable was to take a field and go in and work it. And when you come off the field, it was all worked down beautiful and planted, and the crops that come off of it. I would have loved to. I even go back now and dream about what I might have done. But my dad grew up, when he started out, he run into the Great Depression, and the banks come in and foreclosed on farms, and it was a calamity. Well, and many of the farmers of his age, they did the same thing. If they got a hold of a piece of ground and it was paid for, you couldn't beat them hard enough to get them to mortgage it. And that was the way my dad was. He got that farm paid for. And from then on, he never did any of the farm, but what he didn't have money to pay for it. Today you'd have to go in debt. We have a friend out here in Idaho now. He's built his up. He's my same age. But he built the farm up out there, started out with 150 acres. Him and his three sons have taken it over. They now have about 8,000 acres. Right today, they're in debt, $8 million on tractors and so forth. So it gives you the how you ever get the start is the big obstacle. And so you do what you have to do. I graduated from high school in 1949, Midway High School. And that was the end of it. There was no more Midway High School. But that fall, after the crops were out, and what was then Rick's College, which is now BYU Idaho, it offered to the farm kids that was out there to get them started into college. They offered a short course. You could go up and register, and they had it figured so instead of a full, and it was on quarter, so instead of doing the full quarter, you did a half a quarter. So my friend and I, we went up and we signed up for that short course. I wrangled out a $500 I can't think of the word. Scholarship. So that paid for half my winter's school. We lived in Rexburg, them cold old winters up there. And I went through winter quarter, and I would come home on weekends. In those days, you could hitchhike. And so every Friday afternoon, I'd get my suitcase out, had a big blue R on it. And I'd hike down, get on the main highway, and I'd stick that suitcase out with the big blue R on it so people knew I was from Rick's College. So I'd always thumb my way home, and I always got home in almost record time. Then my folks would take me back up on Sunday night. So over the weekend, then I would milk the cows and do the chores and do all of that type of thing. So I didn't have money to go into winter quarter or into spring quarter, so I just got out and went. As soon as the weather broke, I went to work on the farm there. I farmed that summer, and Larry and I that summer we rented a bunch of lots in Louisville. They'd have 5-acre lots or anything like that, and we rented about 5 or 6 of those, and we grew potatoes on them. But then the Korean War really was coming to its height at that time. So missionary service was almost an impossible thought because you had to be 20 years old to go on a mission. And so I knew the draft would catch up with me before that. But I decided to go down to Logan to Utah State University and join with the ROTC. So I'd be into the military end of it. So I went down to Utah State and went through the fall quarter down there. Well, I went home in October, and I hitchhiked home from Logan, clear home, and did pretty good. But I had a big blue A on my suitcase, so people would know I was from the Aggies. But I went home this particular weekend, and we was trying to wrap up getting the last of the potatoes out of the lots. So I was trying to help them get the potatoes, and I took a load of potatoes into the warehouse. My bishop was there, so I took the opportunity to talk to him and see what things were. And we talked, and he says, well, I can't call you on a mission until you're 20. So if you don't want to go in the service, get your 2 years over with, and the only thing you can do is go back down to Logan and stay in the ROTC program until that time. So I went away kind of dejected, and the next morning we got a call from the bishop's wife, and she said, the bishop wants to talk to you this morning, you and your parents. So we went in his office, and he says, just this morning, I got word from Salt Lake City that they had lowered the age from 20 down to 19. So you're eligible today to go on a mission. Now, I don't know what that's going to do to your draft status, but we'll put it in. So it wasn't quite such an extensive interview experience that I had to go through to get all my papers. I think it was 1.5 sheets that he had to fill out. So he filled out the sheets. Well, to get on top of that, I had to be interviewed by the stake president. I had to have a medical. So we got an appointment with the stake president that morning. I went and interviewed with him. And my mother's cousin was a doctor in Rigby. And we called him, and he agreed to come in his office on Sunday and give me a physical examination. So we took care of those. But then you had to be interviewed by one of the 12 apostles of the church before you left to go on your mission. Well, then you had to find a state conference somewhere, or else go to Salt Lake City to have it done. But I found out that there was going to be a state conference in Logan the next week, and that Joseph F. Merrill, one of the apostles, was going to be there. So I made arrangements, took all my papers down there, and that next Sunday I got interviewed by Joseph F. Merrill, and he sent my paperwork on in down there. So I was with great anticipation of what was going to happen. And so I went home for Thanksgiving, and the mail come the day after Thanksgiving, and I went out and my letter was there from Salt Lake City. I didn't have any idea where to look for, where I was going, but I mean, I opened that and I was throwing papers every which way, trying to figure out, because I figured there'd be a form. Finally, I settled back down, and it was the opening. And I said then that I was called to go to the California mission, and that I was to enter the Missionary Training Center in Salt Lake City on the 22nd of January. But in the meantime, the church says, well, you've got to have a release from your draft board before we can proceed. So I went to my draft board, and they were pretty amenable to missions. And so they wrote me a letter, and it says he will be drafted no later than March. Well, the church used that as a release. So I went to the Missionary Training Center in Salt Lake City. They were expecting 70 to 80 missionaries in there, and 600 showed up. And it was chaos. They had to move it around, but the closer we got the time to leave to go on our mission, why the draft boards in Salt Lake was coming in and telling the young men, you're done, you got to go. We're going to draft you. And they were not friendly to the mission, but at the end of 10 days, I got set apart by Elder G. Smith, the patriarch. And so I entered the mission field on February the 1st, 1951, and served till February 1st, 1953. So that's how I connected with that. Military stared me in the face when I got home, and that's the way it was. My brother Larry, they wouldn't let the bishops call anybody on a mission unless they were 4F or had already served. So he was unable to go. He stayed home. Of course, he just come 19 just before I got home. But he says, well, I'm going to get mine over with so I can get on with my life. I'm not going to sit back here and try and figure out what the military is going to do. I'm just going to go volunteer for the draft and be gone. Well, he had a farm already set aside, so he went and volunteered for the draft. In the meantime, I went and got a deferment to help my father on the farm for the summer. And I took over his farm, or he had farm. Well, he took off in February. They took him from Idaho Falls out to Boise, where he was going to be inducted into the Army. And he got out there, and when he was a small boy, he'd had heart murmur. Well, when they got out there and gave him his physical, they found the heart murmur, so they rejected him. So now he comes back. Now he hasn't got anything to do, and I got his farm, and I can't give that up because I already got deferred for it. So he worked around different farms and just worked for wages and whatnot, and then that fall they let him go on his mission, and so in October he left to go on a mission.
Where did he serve?
He served in the Northern States Mission at that time, which was out of Chicago, about half of the Midwest. He served from Iowa clear up to almost up to the right edge of Minnesota and all over. So that took care of that situation. But now, when I got through farming that fall, I went and see if I could have the farm for another year and get another deferment or whatever. And my uncle would not let me have the farm because his daughter had got in trouble and got married to another farmer, so he let him have the farm, which is understandable. But now that left me out in limbo, and I tried to rent another farm, couldn't rent any farms. So I talked with Noreen, my wife, and I says, we ain't going to get anywhere now until we get this military thing behind us, so we just well get started and get it over with. But I'd had a case of ulcers all summer, and that I'd picked up on my missions, and I had a x-ray and had all the records. So I went to the doctor and I says, well, give me a letter, tell me what we got, and I'm going to go volunteer for the military. So he gave me a letter, and I volunteered for the draft, and they took me out there, and then they turned me down. So now I'm out on the edge, and I have to determine where am I going to go with a career.